This is a Dynamite Network podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we are pitting the Doom Patrol leader, Niles Calder, aka the Chief, against the X-Men leader, Charles Xavier, aka Professor X.
Yeah, both of these guys are bound to wheelchairs. They're both wicked smart. And while one of them has powers and the other one doesn't, the Chief is highly versatile and a complete wild card. So I think it's going to be a pretty good match. We said last week that this episode was going to be Dorothy Spinner versus Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, but we're actually going to punt that duel to later on next month. And we're going to do this one now.
Yeah, before the matchup, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, of which there was just one minor news item in regards to speculation around Gal Gadot's involvement in a potential Wonder Woman movie. And we're also going to bring on Ken Johnson, the host of the Max Destruction podcast, to talk about his show.
Yeah, as always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out our show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
As our listeners may know, our duel simulator is so advanced that it's gained sentience and has named itself the artificial life form for running extensive duels, just a rather very intelligent simulator 9000, or Alfred Jarvis 9000. He has a quick message for our listeners, so listen up.
Why, hello there. Do you love listening and chatting about Marvel and DC? Then become a part of the Dynamic Duel community on Patreon, where you can choose from 3 tiers. The Dynamic 2.0 tier lets you listen to this podcast without ads and gives you access to its Discord chat group where you can chat with Johnny DC and Marvelous Joe. The Fantastic 4 tier gives you that and more with 2 bonus episodes each month, including bloopers and top 10 shows where Johnny and Joe count down your favourite Marvel and DC subjects. The X-Force tier makes you an executive producer of Dynamic Duel, where every month you help the host choose what to review and who to fight against each other. And finally, the Dynamite Podcast Network tier allows aspiring podcasters to create their own battle-focused show using this Monte Carlo simulator. Johnny and Joe will help you develop your show, provide graphic support and consultation, and get you simulation results to announce on your show. Pitch the twins your show via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by reaching out to them on social media. Check it out at patreon.com/dynamicduel. Pip pip cheerio.
Thanks, AJ9K, and thanks to everyone who supports the podcast. Be sure to tune into the Max Destruction podcast tomorrow, August 16th, to listen to a review of RoboCop, the cult classic 1980s film. Can't wait for that review. Also, anime fans should check out Senjo World, a new battle podcast featuring your favorite anime characters. In the last episode, they found out who would win between Asta from Black Clover and Meliodas from Seven Deadly Sins. Tune in this Thursday for the next episode drop. To listen to any of the Dynamite Network podcasts, click on the link in our show notes or visit dynamicpodcast.com. And with that out of the way,
quick to the No Prize.
A No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award we post on Instagram and in our email newsletter for the person that we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week, we asked, besides Loki, what other Disney Plus Marvel television series that has come out do you most hope gets a season 2? And this is coming off of the trailer for Loki season 2. We got quite a few answers. Let's go ahead and run down our honorable mentions as well as the No Prize winner.
Our first honorable mention goes to Travis Herndon, who said,
"Hey guys, Travis here. My pick will be a very controversial pick, but I would say She-Hulk. I feel like that show could get redeemed with a season 2. Maybe bring in some people who've done the comics to write for She-Hulk, as well as maybe bringing in 1 or 2 people who've done good lawyer shows to really make it feel like a lawyer show with a splash of Marvel heroism. I just feel like She-Hulk can get a redemption."
Yeah, this is a great answer that I didn't think about because She-Hulk is, probably the worst Disney Plus Marvel television show to come out, in my opinion. But Tatiana Maslany gave a great performance, and the show's concept has a lot of potential, especially if they lean more into the lawyer comedy drama case of the week type format. Despite the fact how much I disliked season 1, I do think that the show can be redeemed with a season 2. And that's what I want to see.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen before, Kevin Feige is, not above self-correcting when he realizes that he's made a mistake. Take Trevor Slattery, for example. I love what they've done with that character. And likewise, I don't think She-Hulk, the series, is beyond redemption.
It needs to be redeemed, if anything. So great answer, Travis. Our next honorable mention goes to Rick McGrew from the Retro Namapod, who said,
"Hey guys, Rick from the Retro Namapod. I think Jeremy Renner taking up his mantle as Hawkeye would what I'd want to see for a second season. I like a ground level hero. I'd like to see what other adventures Haley Steinfeld would get up to as Kate Bishop and kind of see where the relationship evolves to from where we left off. So yeah, season 2 of Hawkeye, I think, is the win."
Yeah, due to Jeremy Renner's unfortunate accident that happened last year, it's likely that he wouldn't take a starring action role within a Hawkeye season 2, but that's completely fine because they did a great job of setting up the character's legacy in Kate Bishop in Hawkeye season 1. I think we really need to see where the story goes from there, and I'm surprised actually that a Hawkeye season 2 hasn't been announced yet.
Yeah, same. I mean, considering that Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye was one of the first main Avengers, I would really hope to see that a subsequent season would kind of establish a new Avengers or sort of push in that direction, because I think the Avengers team is something that's sorely missing from the MCU right now that people are interested in.
For sure, yeah, and Hawkeye season 1 was definitely the most Avengers-y feeling to it out of all the Disney Plus shows. Great answer, Rick. Our next honorable mention goes to Anson Millard, who said,
"Hey guys, this is Anson Millard. The easy answer for this is Moon Knight. It was one of the best received Disney Plus shows. I think it's the best setup to have a sequel in another season. We can finally see Mark and Steven work together with their combined powers, but there's also some room for some drama between them because they like the same girl. Can see some more stuff with Jake, and I would love if they tie him more into the direct."
It sounds like Anson got cut off there, but I think he was going to say he would like them to tie it more in the direction of the comics. That's only a guess, because while the Moon Knight television series was good, it was largely a departure from the source material. But he's right. I want to see where the Mark and Steven relationship goes, especially with Scarlet Scarab in the mix. And in the very last scene of season 1, we got introduced to Jake Lockley's character, who I think can be explored too. There's still a lot of mysteries within that show that I think would be fun to see get addressed.
Yeah, and it was also nice that the show had some supernatural elements. I would actually like to see Gael Garcia Bernal's Werewolf by Night character make an appearance in the show, considering that, Moon Knight first made an appearance in his comic.
That would be incredible. That would be really cool. I'd like to see those two team up, even if it's just for an episode or something. Just go on an adventure together? Yeah.
Just steering the Moon Knight show in that more supernatural horror route would be really cool.
For sure. Great answer, Anson.
We want to give a quick shout out to Christopher Minotti, Miggy Matanguihan, and Jose Marcial for taking the time to visit our website and record an answer. But the winner of this week's No Prize is Colby Henches, who said,
"Hey boys, Colby Henches. I'm going loose with the concept of season 2. What I want is an Elsa Bloodstone series, coming out of the Werewolf by Night one-shot. It could be a Buffy the Vampire Slayer style Monster of the Week show of just Elsa hunting down different monsters every week. It would be awesome. That's my answer."
Hell yeah, bro. This was a genius answer. Totally sold me on this pitch of having a Buffy the Vampire Slayer take on the character of Elsa Bloodstone, who was first introduced in the Werewolf by Night special presentation around Halloween last year. This is fantastic. We could see the origin of the monster hunters, get more backstory on her father Ulysses and the Bloodstone itself, and get introduced to a lot of supernatural characters from the comics incorporated into the MCU.
Plus, we could potentially get more Man-Thing, who I think should be the new Groot. He just seems like a really fun, cool character, which is weird to say, but it is what it is.
And maybe we would even get more Gael Garcia Bernal as Werewolf by Night. He could just cameo in all the shows, including Moon Knight. So yeah, out of these answers, I would most want to see a Bloodstone series, for sure. So congrats to Colby Henches for winning this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done, on to the news.
Okay, a couple of weeks ago, Gal Gadot gave an interview to comicbook.com where she said that, she loved playing Wonder Woman and that she heard from James Gunn and Peter Safran, the heads of DC Studios, that they were going to develop Wonder Woman 3 together. Not long after that, she did another interview with Flaunt magazine where she explicitly said that she was invited to a meeting with James Gunn and Peter Safran, and that they told her, and she said this was a quote, that you're in the best hands. We're going to develop Wonder Woman 3 with you. We love you as Wonder Woman. You've got nothing to worry about. This kind of caused an uproar on the interwebs from people who either loved the idea of Gal Gadot remaining as Wonder Woman and another project happening in the new Gunverse, or just absolutely hated the idea and wanted Wonder Woman recast. We haven't really heard anything from James Gunn regarding this situation, which is strange considering, he'll go on to Twitter to debunk any random rumor that appears on there. But we did hear from Warner Brothers through a Variety article saying that basically Gal Gadot was mistaken. There are no plans to proceed with a Wonder Woman film with her involved at this time. And there's no Wonder Woman film planned at all, only the Paradise Lost prequel series that kind of tells the story of the Amazons prior to Wonder Woman being born, essentially.
Yeah, if you ask me, I think Gal Gadot was trying to play to her fan base to force James Gunn and Peter Safran's hand into keeping her on as Wonder Woman in the new DCU. I think Gal Gadot has a disease, and it's called liabetes. And I stole that from a gift that I posted on Discord.
I don't think her intentions were malevolent at all. I think someone asked her for an update, and she just honestly told them what she was told. I think, James and Peter absolutely told her that, they're fans of her as the character and that they would like to develop a new Wonder Woman movie with her. But saying you're going to develop a project with someone does not mean that they're going to star in that movie. We all know that Gal Gadot is a huge Wonder Woman fan. It, basically helped make her career. But considering the fact that this is a whole new fresh start, it would be really confusing to me if Gal Gadot continued in the role. I wouldn't hate it, though, if she served as like an executive producer, maybe something like that. She would still be able to develop the story if she's truly that passionate about the character.
Yeah, it would be like she's passing on the baton to the next Wonder Woman in this new universe. I think that she played the character well enough that I would like to see her at least partially involved, even if it's just a executive producer title in the new reboot.
All in all, while I do love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman and think she's perfect in the role, I don't think she's the only one who's perfect in the role or has the potential to be perfect in the role. And I'm excited to see, what is in store for the future of the character on the big screen.
Yeah, personally, I'm hoping for a full-on reboot and recast, but that brings us to our question of the week. Who would you want to direct a Wonder Woman reboot and why? Now, we already asked you guys who you would want to recast as Wonder Woman if the role did get recast, and we got some great answers, but now we want to hear about your director choices.
Record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message could be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and award that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to Instagram and our email newsletter. Be sure to answer before August 19th. But that does it for all the news for this episode. Let's go ahead and bring on Ken Johnson, the host of Max Destruction, a Dynamite Podcast Network show that pits your favorite action heroes from movies and television against each other.
Yeah, I'll get him on the line right now. Hey, Ken, glad to have you back on the show since you were last on for our 2004's Punisher review. How's it going?
Great, except you didn't have me back for Punisher Warzone, which I took as a personal affront.
We had to call a quick audible on that one because of Ray Stevenson's passing, but we did want to have you on for that episode if that is any consolation.
It is. R.I.P. Ray. You guys did a great job. I think it was well reviewed. It was outstanding. I appreciate you guys having me on for Punisher. That was definitely one of my favorite things to do. and really kind of put me into where I am now.
For those who don't know, Ken is an executive producer of Dynamic Duel. And as someone who has some influence over what we do on this podcast, he came to us essentially pitching a sister show to ours, where he would use the Monte Carlo simulator we use, but for action movie star fights. And from that idea spawned not only his show, Max Destruction, but the whole Dynamite podcast network. So Ken, first off, thank you for that. Between Max Destruction and Senjo World, I think we're developing a pretty neat collection of shows, and Jonathan and I love nothing more than taking credit for things that we're only tangentially involved in.
100%. And it's my way of influencing from the bottom.
Yeah, Max Destruction has about 14 episodes right now. Your 15th episode is coming out tomorrow. Your co-host is another executive producer of the show, Dustyn Balcom, who reviewed Big Hero 6 with us. Ken, how aware were you at the time when you selected Dustyn to do the show that you were going to be upstaged at every turn?
So it's a very interesting question, and I really appreciate you asking that because we can finally settle the score. Dustyn definitely upstages me every time. He is the one that's actually working all the little puppet strings in the background. I'm not even really a person. You guys have been talking to an AI program this entire time that Dustyn has created. You know what? Honestly, it's been a blessing to have Dustyn as my co-host. Previous to this podcast, of course, I had You Call Those Tactics, which the longest and worst issue I had with that is finding a co-host that I could riff with. It's so much fun to have somebody there with you, either hyping you up or trying to shit on you at every turn, which is, I find, probably the most enjoyable about our podcasts. And it's right up there with our deli guy, right? It just spontaneously happened. And I'm so glad Dustyn is willing and able to keep up with my shenanigans.
Yeah, the deli guy is a fictional character that pops up in every episode of Max Destruction and is the brunt of a lot of the collateral damage that happens in their speculative battles. And it is awesome. But I had to prop my boy Dustyn up because he's part of Team Marvel on our Discord. But you and Dustyn have developed quite a funny antagonistic relationship, and you guys have speculated on some incredible fights like Jason Bourne versus James Bond, Zorro versus Spartacus, Blade versus Riddick. I have my own favorites so far, but what has been your favorite episode to record?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'll give you my top two. My first favorite really is Bourne versus Bond. As a military professional and representing the United States, I was glad really to bring home that win.
For America.
Yeah, America, freedom, right? The greatest episode I think I've had the most fun with is probably one of the last ones we did, which was Frank Dukes versus Nacho Libre.
I really loved that one.
I knew from the moment that I chose Nacho, I was free to just come at it as ham-handed as I wanted to. And I have such love for both characters that no matter how it turned out, it didn't matter to me.
Yeah, I have the unfortunate distinction of running the stats for Max Destruction. So all of the episodes are spoiled for me. I always know who's going to come out on top. But the speculations that you and Dustyn do are just fantastic. I have to say, I think my favorite episode so far is The Crow versus Dean Winchester. Just learning about Dean Winchester, I never watched the show Supernatural, but it made me interested in that show because it's like totally the type of show that I would very much watch and enjoy. And The Crow is just awesome. I loved the fact that you guys do these battles in environments because you essentially say, fuck Dynamic Duel, and they're not environment scenarios that they come up with. The environments you guys establish, like the church for that specific match, was just so cool as part of the visualization and the imagination of just thinking about what was going on as you guys were describing it.
Yeah, my favorite episode, I think, has been Jack Slater versus Dr. Smolder Bravestone, which is essentially Last Action Hero versus Jumanji. Largely for nostalgic reasons. I just really have a fond nostalgia for the movie Last Action Hero, which I remember seeing in theaters as a kid. I also really liked Cameron Poe and Axel Foley. I think the speculation on that was top tier. As hosts, you and Dustyn do a great job of making these two very disparate characters interact in a way that feels true to how they would interact while staying true to themselves and the movie worlds they came from. So I think that's one of the best things about your show.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. obviously the speculation you think would kind of come easily. I can honestly say that was the hardest thing to kind of get to. Like listening to you guys is like, man, I don't know how you guys think this is hard. You're just talking up a video game between two characters, but then, taking these individuals that you may or may not have a ton of understanding with. Like you're taking these characters that haven't been seen on the big screen, early 90s, sometimes 80s, and then trying to apply them across the speculation and try to make it fun. So, getting the stride of tit for tat, if I'm going to do left, he's going to do right, but also not choreography, trying not to set it up prior to having it be spontaneous. And then for me, always finding that way of putting the nut shot on Dustyn. And it doesn't matter what character it is. I'm going to find a way of doing it because I know he's expecting it. And now I know the audience is expecting it because I'm getting that feedback. So audience,
Right.
Thank you. Keep it coming. It really drives me to excellence per sens of finding the way of achieving that goal.
For sure. My favorite nut shot so far actually is when Zorro threw his hat into Spartacus's balls. That was, I think, the most creative so far. Really like that. Did not see it coming. So kudos.
I even loved the Nacho one where he just kind of like fell over and like hit it from the floor. Yeah. That was great.
Speculating battles is almost like an art form, and you guys are doing so much better than we did at the same stage in your podcast. Jonathan and I always knew the simulator could be used for something more than just comics characters, and as movie fans, we're super glad you wanted to do an action movie podcast. As a fellow movie fan, what are some of your favorite action movies, and can we expect any of those to show up in future episodes?
So, absolute favorite action movies. One of them is the episode that just came out, which is Indiana Jones. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade are my absolute favorite movies on Earth. They really are. So, Indiana Jones is my favorite, and I personally cannot wait to see how that turns out against Jack Sparrow. Terminator is definitely up there. So Terminator 2 is the greatest action movie on Earth, and I would defy anybody to fight me on that one. And I will legitimately fight you, not Monte Carlo simulated, but anywhere, anytime we will fight. The Terminator will definitely be showing up. We're working on that. I really, really enjoy noir films. Casablanca is not an action movie per se, but I can't wait to pit like Dick Tracy up against somebody. That's going to be fun as we roll out. So our first season is only 20 episodes, guys. So after our first season, we're going to kind of rework things and revisit and really take a look at these character matchups that the audience has been putting out. And by picking out the ones that we think would work the best, those are going to be episodes that will be coming up in season 2 and so on.
I can't wait to see what matches you guys come up with in the future. I'm hoping for Neo from The Matrix and Bruce Willis from Die Hard.
There's so many.
Yeah. Well, it was great to have you on as part of this episode, Ken. Max Destruction is an awesome show, and we are super proud to have it as part of the Dynamite Network. Listeners, if you love action movies and you want to see who would win in a fight and are interested in hearing all the creative ways Ken sneaks in a nutshot into the speculations, listen to Max Destruction anywhere you listen to podcasts or by visiting dynamicpodcast.com. All right, Ken, thank you so much for stopping by, and can't wait to listen to more of your show, and take care.
Thanks, guys.
If you guys aren't following Max Destruction on Instagram, be sure to do so. Ken's often posting weekly audience matchup ideas that are pretty fun to participate in.
Yeah, it's a really fun show. Support a fellow Dynamite Network podcast by subscribing to and following Max Destruction.
But now let's get into the main event of this episode, where we find out who's going to win in a battle between the Doom Patrol leader, the Chief, and the X-Men leader, Professor X. Okay, the Chief versus Professor X. This is definitely a mind over matter duel, which are always pretty interesting to do. It's taken us a while to determine who we would want to pit against the Chief, because he doesn't really have any powers. His superpower is essentially that he's just really smart. But when it came down to it, it was really hard not to do Professor X, considering the fact that Professor X is kind of inspired by the Chief.
Yeah, and the X-Men themselves were heavily inspired by Doom Patrol. This duel, of course, is in lead up to our 350th episode, which will be a team duel between the Doom Patrol and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, we all know Professor X is like the foremost telepathic mind in the Marvel Universe, and a lot of people are probably wondering why he's going up against the Chief, who seemingly has no powers, but I think the people who read Doom Patrol or watch the series and know all about Niles Caulder know that he has a contingency for everything. That is basically his superpower. He's so versatile, it's almost like he has every superpower in like a one-time use kind of situation. That's the impression that I get. So I think the stats will play out accordingly, and it should be closer than I think a lot of people would give the Chief credit for.
Yeah, anyone doubting the Chief, I think, simply doesn't know the Chief. But we're going to rectify that in this episode. But to explain the methodology behind our duels, let's go to our sentient duel simulator, Alfred Jarvis 9000. AJ9K, tell our listeners how you go about determining a winner in our duel matchups.
Yes, of course, sir. The way I determine a winner between the contestants is by running 1,000 Monte Carlo simulations using the character's statistics. A Monte Carlo simulation is a probabilistic model used to determine outcomes through random sampling. In this case, I randomize the statistics along a normal distribution as a way to simulate the many variables that can occur during battle. The stat parameters are based on the official Marvel power grid, from which the DC character's statistics are extrapolated. Additional stat categories are included such as range, damage potential, versatility, and perception in order to create a more detailed and accurate simulation. The results of the 1,000 simulations provide a percentage of wins for each character. The contestant with the higher percentage is declared the victor, as they have a higher probability to win any given battle. In an equitable pairing, neither character should win 100% of the matches. The comic book stories have shown that there's even a way for Batman to defeat Superman, so the confidence rate of my method falls in line with the precedents that have been established in the source material. My mathematical simulations are without subjectivity or bias. Feats are not the sole consideration, nor are fan votes tabulated for determination of the winner.
Thanks, AJ9K. Before we run the simulations, though, we like to break down each character's histories and abilities before improvising a scenario on how we imagine one of the 1,000 simulations would play out beat for beat.
And I believe it's my turn to go first with the DC character's backstory, so let me tell you all about Niles Caulder, aka the Chief. Now, Niles Caulder was born with an aptitude for genius. He was a polymath who excelled in his studies, particularly in science and engineering, due to his obsession with the gothic horror novel Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, written by Mary Shelley. Fascinated by the concept of creating life, Niles built incredible robots, and, after obtaining his doctorate, was given a grant by a mysterious benefactor who had noticed his work. Niles created a laboratory, and after running experiments and developing a ray that could reanimate dead tissue, he traveled the world, learning from other scientists and shamans the ways in which to prolong life. While in India during the 1960s, Niles made considerable progress on a life-extending formula with the help of a wealthy mystic named Ashok Desai, whose wife had died during childbirth. Believing that the formula was nearly complete, Ashok tested it on himself, and though it worked, he also activated a latent metagene within him, turning himself into a living portal to the netherworld and driving him insane. Ashok's daughter, Arani, feared her father and ran away, living on the streets of Calcutta, where she became deathly ill. Niles eventually found Arani and married her, giving her the formula on their wedding night in order to heal her sickness. Concerned about the motivations behind his mysterious benefactor, Niles left Arani in the Himalayas to keep her safe. Niles soon discovered that his benefactor was a man named General Immortus, an evil and wealthy despot and former Nazi who had lived for thousands of years thanks to a magic potion that he had lost the formula for and was counting on Niles to recreate. When Niles refused to finish his work for Immortus, the villain implanted a bomb in Niles' chest, which could be detonated remotely or if Niles attempted to remove it while he was still alive. Forced to continue his work, Niles instead orchestrated a plan in which he manipulated Immortus into shooting and killing him, stopping his heart, after which a surgical robot that Niles invented removed the bullet and the bomb and resuscitated Niles back to life. The operation took longer than planned, however, and as a result, Niles was left a paraplegic without the use of his legs. Initially distraught, Niles eventually developed a theory that he called the catastrophe curve, essentially believing that traumatic events such as his own would force people to adapt and emerge stronger and better than before. Deciding he needed to stop General Immortus, Niles sought others who had underwent debilitating traumas to help him combat evil, eventually putting together the Doom Patrol, which initially consisted of Robot Man, Negative Man, and Elastigirl, each of whom you could learn more about in their respective Duel episodes against the Thing, Cyclops, and Miss Marvel respectively. Having become wealthy by patenting several inventions, Niles used scientific means to help each of the Doom Patrol members overcome the accidents that left them quote-unquote freaks and develop superhuman abilities as a result. Niles himself, however, kept his motivations and even his identity a secret from the team, revealing himself only as the Chief. It wasn't until numerous adventures later, during the Doom Patrol's third battle against General Immortus, that Niles was forced to explain his real name and backstory to the team. Several years later, while battling the villains General Zal and Madame Rouge, Niles and the other Doom Patrol members decided to sacrifice their lives in order to stop the villains from blowing up the small town of Codsville, Maine. You can learn more about this in our Madame Rouge vs. Mystique Duel episode. Upon hearing of Niles' death, Arani left Asia and started her own Doom Patrol team to find Niles, who she believed was still alive. Arani, whose temperature-controlling metagene was activated after Niles left her due to his formula, went by the codename Celsius, and it was later revealed that her hunch was correct. Niles had survived the explosion thanks to a force field that he had activated, after which he went into hiding from General Immortus and began secretly working for the US government. Arani died shortly after Niles' existence was discovered, and Niles rejoined the Doom Patrol, which reformed with all new members including Dorothy Spinner and Crazy Jane, the latter of whom you can learn more about in our Crazy Jane vs. Legion episode. During the team's adventures, Niles had secretly been working on his magnum opus, the ultimate and cruelest implementation of his catastrophe curve theory. After killing one new Doom Patrol member known as Tempest for asking too many questions, Niles was confronted by Robot Man, to whom Niles revealed that he was responsible for the original Doom Patrol team's traumatic accidents, along with several others who made up the Doom Patrol's enemy team known as the Brotherhood of Evil. Just before Niles could enact his master plan to detonate a nanotech bomb that would destroy half the world's population and turn the rest into freaks, his head was torn from his body by the Candlemaker, a creature created from the mind of Dorothy Spinner. Dr. William Magnus, who you can learn more about in our Metalman vs. Colossus episode, managed to save Niles' head, however, and built a new robotic body for him, while insisting that Niles make up for his horrible actions. Racked with guilt, Niles removed his own head from his robot body, after which he existed as a disembodied head for some time. After rebuilding the Doom Patrol and merging with one of its new members, Niles died after entering the Tree of Life. After the events of Infinite Crisis, when Superboy Prime altered events within DC's continuity, the original Doom Patrol, including Niles Calder, emerged as a team once again, and while its members were aware that Niles was responsible for their accidents, they forgave him. During the Blackest Night event, Arani was resurrected as an evil Black Lantern zombie, and used her powers to freeze and shatter Niles' legs. After teleporting her and other Black Lanterns to the Justice League's location for them to deal with, Niles set to work on creating a new body for himself, successfully forming one from Kryptonian cells, allowing him to gain the powers of Superman. After turning on his team, he was defeated by the Doom Patrol, and his comatose body was placed in storage. In post-Flashpoint continuity, Niles Calder created a Doom Patrol team consisting of its original members and Element Woman. After the team learned from Lex Luthor that Niles caused the traumatic accidents that turned them into superhumans, the team disbanded. Niles was able to reform the team eventually, but they fired him once they realized he was using them for his own selfish purposes once again. And that's Niles Caulder's history. Powers-wise, the Chief has a genius-level intellect and is a world-renowned expert in the fields of robotics, engineering, chemistry, physics, biology, and many others. He's developed an array of machines, devices, and formulas, including Robot Man's body, the radiation-containing bandages of Negative Man, a life ray that brings the recently dead back to life, nanobots that can rearrange matter itself, an elixir that extends one's lifespan, and force field and portal generators from his wheelchair. He also packs a gun, so break yourself.
Niles Caulder has always been a fascinating character to me. I think he's one of DC's most interesting characters, actually, largely informed by my viewing of the Doom Patrol television series, but to actually hear the comic book series, I'm all the more intrigued. It was really interesting how he ended up in a wheelchair, but I think it's weird how writers made him go from a guy who was testing out the catastrophe theory into like a supervillain who wanted to destroy half the world. I feel like that was a pretty large leap there.
Well, Niles Caulder's character has always sort of been about like, don't self-pity yourself, even though like this horrible thing happened to you, you can turn that into something greater. They took that to its extreme, where he believed that catastrophe was necessary to sort of evolve humanity. And so he was going to be the arbiter of that. Delusions of grandeur. 100%.
You know what, though? Professor X has some dark shit in his backstory, too. Let me go ahead and tell you all about that right now. Now, Charles Xavier was born in New York City to Sharon and Brian Xavier, a renowned nuclear physics researcher operating in New Mexico. As a genetic mutant, Charles began manifesting the earliest signs of his latent psychic potential while still in the womb, as he recognized his twin as a malignant presence. Though his sister Cassandra tried to kill Charles as a fetus, he was able to defend himself with his telepathic ability, causing Cassandra to apparently be stillborn. When Charles was 9 years old, his father Brian died in an accident at the research facility, and his mother Sharon married a Dr. Kurt Marco. The three moved into Sharon's family estate in Westchester, New York, where Charles met his new stepbrother, Kane Marco. Charles' new stepfather, Dr. Kurt Marco, was abusive, however, and relentlessly beat his wife Sharon and his son Kane, who in turn bullied Charles. The young Charles not only endured torment at the hands of his stepbrother, but as his telepathic abilities began growing in power, he also experienced Kane's and his mom Sharon's abuse firsthand. Ultimately, the abuse proved to be too much for Sharon, and she succumbed to alcoholism. Shortly after, Dr. Kurt Marco died in a fire inside their mansion home, leaving Charles and Kane as orphans. Fortunately, Charles had a gifted academic mind and was able to graduate high school and attend Bard College, graduating with a degree in biology at age 18, by that point having lost all of his hair. He then went overseas to Oxford University for his postgraduate studies, earning master degrees in genetics and biophysics. There, he met fellow student Moyer McTaggart, and the two developed a romantic relationship. After college, Charles decided to join the military, where he excelled in search and rescue missions through the use of his telepathic powers. Charles then traveled the world, ending up working at an Israeli hospital for Holocaust survivors, where he first encountered a fellow mutant named Eric Lenscher, whom you can learn more about in our Sinestro vs. Magneto Duel episode. The two men often debated on how the evolving human race would affect mankind. While Eric foresaw war and death, having suffered his whole life for being different, Charles, more idealistic, hoped for a future of peace and acceptance between humans and mutants. Later, after encountering a destructive, power-hungry mutant called the Shadow King in Egypt, Charles realized that the existence of malevolent mutants would mean he would ultimately have to fight to protect his cause and convince the human race of a peaceful coexistence. He then traveled to the Himalayan mountains, where he encountered an alien named Lucifer, who was scouting the planet in preparation for a future invasion. To prevent any interference, the alien dropped a massive stone block on Charles' legs, crippling him. While recovering in Bombay, India, Charles began working on a device called Cerebro that would amplify his telepathic abilities and help him find other mutants. He began psychically reaching out to young mutants in an effort to help them control their powers, including a young Jean Grey, whom you can learn more about in our Raven vs. Phoenix episode. Charles then traveled back to New York and attended Columbia University, where he received a PhD in anthropology and a medical doctorate in psychiatry, before transforming his family estate in Westchester into an institute for young mutants. It was there he would teach, protect, and guide students in the use of their burgeoning abilities, instilling in them his dream of human and mutant peace. Charles' initial students consisted of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Archangel, and Iceman, and he called them the X-Men for their extra abilities. You can learn more about the team in our Titans vs. X-Men Team Duel episode. In their first field mission, the X-Men fought Charles' old friend Eric, now known as Magneto, who had assembled his own group, the Brotherhood of Mutants, to enforce mutant superiority. Over the years, the X-Men protected humanity from threats such as the Juggernaut, who was Charles' stepbrother Cain Marko, now imbued with the power of the magical Crimson Bands of Cytoric, a mystic entity. Charles also directed his team against the Sentinels, who were mutant hunting robots, and the Savage Land Mutates, who were experiments from an Antarctic jungle. Though Charles and the X-Men saved the Earth time and again, they never won humanity's respect, and mankind's fear of mutants only grew. With his reputation preceding him, Charles joined an elite secret group of the planet's most influential figures, called the Illuminati, which included Iron Man, the Submariner, Doctor Strange, Mr. Fantastic, and Black Bolt, and the group would prevent sensitive global catastrophes in secret. Eventually, the X-Men came across Krakoa, a sentient island that captured the team, forcing Charles to recruit a new band of mutants to rescue them, including Storm, Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler. As his group of students grew, Charles received a telepathic message from Lilandra, the princess of the Shi'ar alien race who sought his help. Charles and Lilandra fell in love, and after a mission that seemingly killed most of the X-Men, he moved to space to live with the Shi'ar as Lilandra's consort. Charles later returned to Earth and recruited another young team called the New Mutants. Around this time, he learned that he had a son named David with a woman he met in Israel. The young man suffered from severe psychic trauma and would later be known as the Mutant Legion. Eventually, the missing X-Men returned, and Charles led the team to fight Magneto on his orbital asteroid base. During that fight, Charles mentally shut down Magneto's mind, which caused the evil portion of the villain's psyche to implant itself in Charles' brain. This evil presence, combined with Charles' vast telepathic power, eventually manifested into a dark psychic entity called Onslaught, which took a majority of Earth's heroes to defeat and nearly destroyed the world. Remorseful for his part in Onslaught's creation, Charles turned himself over to government authorities, who then attempted to use Charles' powers against mutant kind. Rescued by the X-Men, Charles helped the team fight the ancient mutant Apocalypse, but faced a more personal psychic threat when his twin sister Cassandra returned. Cassandra Nova was revealed to have survived from the womb as a psychic presence and took over Charles' body. She exposed Charles as a mutant to the world and caused the obliteration of the entire mutant population living on the island of Genosha. Eventually, Jean Grey was able to use Cerebro to help constitute Charles' mind within his own body, pushing Cassandra Nova out. Charles used the publicity surrounding his mutant status to create the X Corporation, an organization with headquarters around the world that would provide resources to mutants in need. All was not well, however, as it was later revealed that Charles had kept secrets from the X-Men. Back when the X-Men were captured by the sentient island of Krakoa, Xavier had recruited a new team to rescue them, but they perished in the attempt. Xavier also kept secret that the Danger Room was powered by a sentient Shi'ar artificial intelligence that he had suppressed. The AI eventually broke free and attacked the X-Men. After a time, Xavier was able to make peace with the Danger Room, and he sought redemption alongside the mutant Gambit in their mission to stop the evil geneticist Mr. Sinister. At one point, Cyclops, who had amassed the power of the Phoenix Force and had become Dark Phoenix, killed Charles. With him dead, the villainous Red Skull harvested Charles' brain and used it to imbue himself with telepathic powers, turning himself into the Red Onslaught. After the Red Onslaught was defeated, it was revealed that Charles' mind had been abducted by the Shadow King to fight in a never-ending battle on the Astral Plane, which is a psychic plane of existence. The X-Men found Charles and rescued him from the Astral Plane, with X-Men member Phantom X donating his body for Charles' mind to inhabit. Shortly after, Charles implemented a plan he had been working on with former love interest Moira McTaggart to create a sovereign mutant nation on the sentient island of Krakoa. He developed a system in which all mutants could live in peace and be resurrected through a process that used a combination of mutant abilities. Charles sent telepathic invitations to all mutants, helping to turn Krakoa into an influential world power and finally finding a worthy compromise between his ideals and those of his old friend Magneto. And that's his backstory. Powers-wise, Professor X possesses vast psionic abilities and is regarded as having the most powerful mind on Earth. With his psychic powers, he can perform a variety of telepathic effects, including mind reading, mind control, mind erasure, mind transference, thought casting, illusion casting, psychic cloaking, psychic shielding, psychic pain, and psychic astral projection, all at a range of up to 250 miles or 400 kilometers. He has a genius-level IQ and is the world's foremost authority on genetics and mutation, and is an expert in nearly every field of mental and life sciences, as well as an expert strategist and diplomat. He is also gifted in engineering, having created Cerebro, which amplifies his abilities to a global range and has become mobile in its latest versions. Prior to his paralysis, Professor X was a proficient hand-to-hand fighter, having received combat training from his time in the military. His weaknesses include telepathic shielding, such as Magneto's helmet, and the paralysis of his legs. To offset this latter weakness, though, he rides a hover chair invented by the mutant Forge, who incorporated Shi'ar technology and is controlled via mental command. And that's Professor X.
I totally forgot about Onslaught.
Mm-hmm.
Would we ever do a duel with Onslaught?
The entity itself doesn't have a huge history on its own.
Okay.
But I guess I could go into greater detail of the story of Onslaught if and when that time came.
Okay, cool. Well, now that we've got their histories and abilities out of the way, let's speculate on how one of the 1,000 simulated matches will go. The winner is determined by simulations, not this speculation, but it's fun to imagine how this fight could play out. Alfred Jarvis 9000, what are the rules of our speculation?
Well, I should say there are no rules, other than the characters have no prior knowledge of the other going into the fight. All they are aware of starting out is that the other character is a threat that needs to be eliminated. For the speculation, the contestants will begin approximately 50 meters apart in a nondescript environment that will have no bearing on the match itself, as no environmental statistics are considered in my simulations. The contestants must earn victory on their own merit.
All right, then let's get into it. The Chief and Professor X meet on the battlefield. Who goes first? Personally, I think Professor X is going to start off by mentally scanning the Chief's mind and learning all about this guy, who he is, what he can do.
Okay, I was prepared for this though. Okay, because I'm thinking, like, the Chief's brain is a vast labyrinth of knowledge and experiences that would make, like, most men's heads just explode if they ever got a peek. So,
okay,
if Professor X ever got a mental glimpse into that mind, like, at the very least, he'd be so shocked by the breadth of information and atrocities and just dark thoughts within the Chief's mind. He'd just be like, holy crap, right? So that's going to leave the Chief at least a few seconds to pull out his gun and just shoot Professor X, like, right in the bald dome.
That is quite the assumption right there. And I'm guessing a lot of your strategy actually hinged on Professor X being shocked by Niles Calder's brain.
Yes.
But you know what? I actually believe that would happen. I think that Niles Calder has a really crazy-ass mind, judging by all the crazy-ass adventures the Doom Patrol have been on. So sure, if the Chief needed to buy himself a second, this is where he buys it. But also, like, then again, Professor X has dealt with, like, a lot of disturbed minds also. So I don't think he's quite as stunned by the Chief's brain as you think he is. I think he's able to actually avoid the Chief's gunshot by using mind control at the last second to throw off his firing hand.
Okay, that just means that the bullet's just gonna hit his hover chair then instead of his head. And, you know, that's gonna make the hover chair malfunction and just go haywire. So Professor X, he's essentially riding a mechanical bull at this point, and he's gonna be too distracted to perform any psychic attacks.
You can't do that to a man in a wheelchair. What the hell's going on here?
Just did. It just did.
Okay, so if Professor X's hover chair is like flying around, Professor X is going to mentally steer it as best he can to crash into the Chief's wheelchair, just murderballing the dude. Do you know what murderball is? Like, people know what murderball is, right?
Yeah, no, I know.
It was a documentary about the U.S. men's paraplegic rugby team.
Right.
And in that movie, they just knocked the shit out of each other, pushing other wheelchair guys to the ground. That's what happens here. The Chief is knocked over in his wheelchair.
Okay, so I didn't mention this in my bio, but the Chief can walk.
What?
He doesn't actually need his wheelchair.
Why?
He cured himself of his paralysis a long time ago. He just used the wheelchair to avoid suspicion and garner sympathy.
Oh my god. What a fucking prick.
Yeah. That's what Robot Man said essentially as well. So the Chief, he just dives back toward his wheelchair, and he's going to activate a button that actually transforms the wheelchair into this like robotic exoskeleton suit, kind of like Robot Man. And wearing that exosuit, he's going to leap onto Professor X's hover chair and just yank him right out of it and just like fling him to the ground.
This dude sucks. But I'm going to say that before the Chief can even lay a hand on the Professor, Professor X is going to start erasing the Chief's mind, right? Including his knowledge of how this exosuit even works. So the Chief's not going to be able to do anything. His mind is just going to go blank.
But like the Chief has worked with psychics on the Doom Patrol like Mento before, so he'd most likely be able to realize if his mind is being erased. And I'm going to say, like, once he notices that, without hesitation, real quick, he's just going to whip out the squirt gun from his jacket, and he's going to spray this anti-metagene formula onto Professor X that's going to erase his mutant powers.
Metahumans aren't the same thing as mutants.
They're basically the same thing.
Chief made a formula that can erase powers?
Well, I mean, he made a formula that could trigger metagenes and extend life. So, sure, yeah, he could reverse engineer that to remove metagene powers as well. The dude's smart.
I'm calling bullshit. I feel like your speculation hinges on a lot of assumptions.
You don't think Chief would be prepared, living in a world with metahumans, to be able to disable them?
I guess he's created so many superpowered beings, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he has means to depower them. But before this depowering formula fully kicks into effect, Professor X, he's going to reach into the trunk of his hover chair and pull out a mobile Cerebro device, and he's going to put it on. It's going to amplify his power so that before his psychic abilities vanish, he still has enough psychic juice to make Chief's mind explode from a telepathic blast.
Force field! Boom!
What?
The blast doesn't reach the Chief because he activates a force field that includes psychic shielding. All right? The Chief's then going to launch a capsule of nanobots from his exosuit at Professor X, and that's just going to disassemble his body at the molecular level. Essentially, it looks like he dissolved Professor X with acid.
Okay, sure. Whatever. All right. But if you remember, earlier in this duel, Professor X erased part of the Chief's mind, right? And the dark malevolent side of the Chief combined with Professor X's psychic power. So now in place of Professor X is Onslaught. Way to go.
Shit.
And now the Chief is fucked like a million times over because Onslaught is just going to tear through his mind and just obliterate it like a boot crushing an ant. And no force field is going to hold Onslaught back. Match over.
So the Chief is dead?
Yeah, the Chief's dead. Onslaught just ripped his mind a new butthole.
Okay, I mean, joke's on you, though, because once the Chief's heart stops beating, it triggers his exosuit to emit a life ray, which brings the recently dead back to life. And once he's back, that's when he activates a portal to the D-Creator, which is this giant eyeball in the sky that lays its sights right on Onslaught and just decreates him. I mean, Niles too, probably, but Onslaught first, so the Chief wins.
Well, I remember the D-Creator from the show.
Yeah, that's way more powerful than Onslaught.
I don't think so, but it doesn't matter because from the very beginning, this whole match actually took place in the astral plane where Professor X took Chief's mind to play out as like a psychic illusion this whole match to see what the Chief would do. And now that Professor X knows what the chief would do and like his curiosity has been satiated, he's just gonna leave the chief in this comatose state where he believes that he's been decreated by the decreator.
How did I know you were going to go there? It's all an illusion. It was all a dream. I say it all really did happen, and Professor X was dissolved and Onslaught was decreated. You can't just go back to the beginning of the match and be like, oh, it never happened.
Yes, I can, because that is one of Professor X's powers. Haters gonna hate, and Mind Manipulator's gonna manipulate. So we'll go ahead and leave the match there and input these character stats and find out which scenario actually happens when we come back with the winner. AG9000, take it away.
Inputting data, running calculations, processing results. Simulations complete.
Okay, as we predicted, these characters have fairly different stats. As we mentioned, Professor X is very one note, and the Chief is quite versatile. In fact, that was the Chief's highest stat, the versatility.
That makes sense because the Chief has a contingency for everything, right? But Professor X was off the charts in terms of damage level, considering the guy can render, like an entire town inert just by shutting down everybody's minds. And his range was also ridiculously high, considering he can stretch his mind out to a radius of 250 miles and extend that even further with Cerebro.
Right. We did say, though, that the Chief was smarter, he had a higher intellect, and he was more evasive, thanks to the fact that he utilizes force fields.
Yeah, I had a real hard time conceding even the notion that the Chief is smarter than Professor X. But then you got to kind of consider the Chief at the same level as Mr. Fantastic Reed Richards. Yes, Professor X is a brilliant genius. A large part of that, though, has to do with his psychic faculties, not necessarily his book smarts. Professor X is the foremost authority on genetics and mutation, but Reed Richards and the Chief can invent teleportation devices. So Professor X was lower in the intelligence stat, but he was much higher in the perception stat, where we accounted for his telepathic abilities, including mind reading.
Yeah, the perception stat is where the two characters had the largest discrepancy when it came to stats. So taking all of this into consideration, who do you think came out on top?
Professor X. Gotta go with the main mind here. As smart as Chief is, he's just not as powerful. And not only do I think that, a vast majority of people think that, because according to our Instagram poll that we put out there, 86% of our Instagram followers think that Professor X is going to win. That's a big margin.
I guarantee you, though, that is just because of the X-Men cartoons and the movies. People just love the X-Men, so of course they're going to vote for an X-Man.
Yeah, people like the X-Men because they're more popular than the Doom Patrol, because Marvel's better. So I agree with you. Yes.
Well, let's see how misplaced your confidence is. AJ9K, the results, please.
Here you are, sir.
The winner of the matchup between the Doom Patrol's Chief and the X-Men's Professor X is Professor X.
You damn right it is.
By 60.8%. Professor X won 608 of the 1,000 simulated matches, whereas the Chief only won 392.
That's actually closer than I thought it was going to be. For as careful as I was not to underestimate Niles Calder, I still did in the fact that he got a few more wins than I thought he would.
I mean, you made a believer out of me. When you first mentioned this match, I didn't think it was going to be that great because I figured Professor X would win. So this isn't really a surprise to me. But when I started delving more into the character and was like, hey, maybe he could pull this off, I really got hopeful. And I regret that now because I feel bad.
Good. Actually, when you were going into the Chief's backstory and you were talking about how he gave himself Superman powers and stuff like that, I'm like, oh no, I made a horrible suggestion. But, I feel really happy about how this all turned out.
Yeah, I mean, the Chief has no powers, but he has tremendous potential. In the end, though, I guess that couldn't overcome just the vast sheer might of Professor X. Which sucks.
I mean, for you, yeah, not for Marvel fans. As it turns out, Professor X has the greater mind. Marvel fans have the greater minds.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yep, you didn't know that? Makes sense because you're a DC fan that you wouldn't know something.
I can't say no, I didn't know that because... yeah. Whatever. That does it for this duel. Let us know what you thought about the results by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Instagram or Twitter X. You can find links to all of our accounts by checking out our show notes or visiting our website at dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you could also find a link to our Patreon page where you could join our Dynamic 2.0 tier and chat with us and fellow listeners, our Fantastic 4 tier, which gets you bonus content each month, our X-Force tier that makes you an executive producer of this podcast, or our newest tier that lets you join our Dynamite Podcast Network. If you can't join Patreon, you can still support this show by signing up for our e-newsletter, also at dynamicduel.com.
Or you could also rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or on our website.
Yeah, let us know what you think. Next week, we are going to review Blue Beetle. That comes out this week.
Get pumped!
I'm not that pumped.
Well, you're dumb, so it makes sense. Everyone else, super stoked. Hopefully, you guys gotta turn out for this movie. Like, we cannot have another DC box office bomb like The Flash.
It's definitely going to happen, man. I'm sorry.
We'll find out, I guess. I'm gonna go see it. I'm taking my whole family to go see it. I encourage you guys to do the same. But that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson,
John Starosky,
Zachary Hepburn,
Dustyn Balcom,
Miggy Matanguihan,
Brandon Estergard,
Nathaniel Wagner,
Levi Yeaton,
Nick Abanto,
Austin Wesolowski,
AJ Dunkerley,
Scott Camacho,
and Adam Speas for helping make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Up, and away.
True believers.
I can read your mind, and right now you are thinking that I can't read minds.